back. In this lesson, the aim is to learn about how the dual aspect of business transactions is recorded in the double entry bookkeeping system. You need to be able to identify whether accounts are asset and liability accounts, whether they are debit or credit records, so that you can enter business transactions accurately. You'll need to be able to calculate the balance on an account so you can explain what it means, as well as identify where it will be recorded in the statement of financial position. In the previous lesson, we learned about the dual aspect of double entry, how every business transaction causes a dual effect. The effects are equal and opposite, and how the total of business assets will always equal the total of its liabilities. Get ready to pause the video to give yourself time to read and answer the question. £50,000 has been paid into the business's bank account, creating an asset. You've effectively lent the business money, creating a liability. The liability is recorded as equity or capital. The processing of business transactions in a double entry bookkeeping system needs to be well thought out, particularly when you're learning. I'll be constantly encouraging you to continually question what you've done and why, as well as get into the habit of double checking your work. We'll begin with questioning whether the effects of the transaction recorded from the previous question are equal. They are, as it's been recorded in two places, using the same amount. The effects are opposite. An asset and liability have been created. The business having cash is the opposite to having a financial obligation. In a double entry bookkeeping system, we use debits and credits to record the opposite effects. Debit records are used to record changes in the value of assets, and credit records are used for liabilities. The double entry bookkeeping system is ancient. The words debit and credit come from the Latin language and have unique meaning in accounting. There are several interpretations of the words. Most commonly, credit is thought to mean entrusted or given. In this example, £50,000 has been entrusted to the business. And a debit record shows what's been received for which something must be due. The business has received £50,000. We record transactions in ledger accounts. When we want to prepare a statement of financial position, these accounts are balanced and the total value of the asset or liability is written on the report. How we enter transactions into them will depend on whether they are debit or credit records. Let's first look at how we record transactions in asset accounts, debit records. The business needs to keep its own record of money that passes through the bank, so it keeps a bank account in the ledger. A ledger used to be a book. You'll notice that the left half of the account is labelled debit, sometimes abbreviated DR, and the right side of the account is labelled credit, CR. Cash is a business asset. A business asset is always recorded on the debit side of the account. So in this example, the business has recorded in its own accounting records that it's holding £50,000 at the bank. When the business receives money, it continues to record receipts on the debit side, adding to the account balance. We can calculate the balance on the account, that's the total amount held at the bank, by adding up all of the deposits, the debit entries. The revised bank balance is £52,500. We have a credit side on the account so that we can reduce the value of assets. It's thought that plus and minuses didn't exist when this system was established. Cash withdrawals and payments will reduce the bank balance. To recalculate the account balance, we deduct the payments, the credit entries from the debit entry total. The revised account balance is £51,650. You might like to pause the video sometimes to make notes, think more carefully about these entries and carry out the calculations for yourself. A good bookkeeper or accountant always double checks the accuracy of their work. Look at the account balance and consider whether the bank balance is what you'd expect it to be, considering the transactions you've posted. If you're not sure, question your entries, and if necessary, recalculate the balance. It's essential you think logically and critically to work accurately. The ledger account will be balanced regularly. We've learned that assets are recorded as debits, so any opening balance on the account will be on the debit side. The opening balance here tells us that the business has an asset in the form of cash of £51,650 at the bank. This is the amount that would be recorded in the asset section of the statement of financial position if we were to prepare it now. Get ready to pause the video to give yourself time to read and answer the question. The opening balance, the amount held in the bank, is on the debit side of the asset account. Receiving money increases the bank balance, so the loan and the receipt from the customer are also recorded on the debit side. Any payments will reduce the amount in the bank, so the payment for the vehicle and tools are recorded on the credit side. To calculate the balance, we total the debit entries and deduct the total of the credit entries. The amount held in the bank is calculated as £70,250. Did you remember to check that this figure looks reasonable? It will be recorded in the Assets section of the Statement of Financial Position. The bank account is one of the few ledger accounts that could have an opening balance on the opposite side of the account. We do not use brackets or minus signs in ledger accounts, so overdrawn balances are recorded on the credit side of the bank account. An overdrawn bank balance would therefore be recorded in the liability section of the Statement of Financial Position, as you need to report that the business owes the bank £500. We still use the account in exactly the same way. Payments will still be recorded on the credit side and receipts on the debit side. Think logically when calculating the account balance. If we spend £100, we will owe the bank £600. If we receive £100, then the amount we owe will be reduced and we will owe the bank £400. So that leads us nicely onto learning about liability ledger accounts, which are credit records. Liabilities are recorded as credits. The capital you introduced is recorded in the capital account as a credit. Further investments are also recorded as credits. To calculate the total amount invested, we add up all the credit entries. Recording it in the liability account shows the readers of the statement of financial position that £80,000 is owed to you or other investors. The debit side of the account is used to record transactions that reduce the amount owed to you, the investor. For example, you might take back £15,000. To recalculate the balance on the account, we deduct the debit entry from the total of the credit entries. The revised account balance, the amount owed to you, is now £65,000. Get ready to pause the video to give yourself time to read and answer the question. The amount of capital you originally provided to the business was £50,000. The additions from you and your friend are added to the balance on the credit side. Withdrawals are recorded on the debit side. To recalculate the balance, total what's been received, the credit entries, and deduct what's been withdrawn, the debit entry. The business now owes you and your friend £90,000. It's recorded as a liability in the statement of financial position. We've just double entered a business transaction. The amount received is an asset to the business in the form of cash, so it's recorded as a debit in the bank account. The amount given is a liability, as it belongs to the investors, so it's recorded as a credit in the capital account. It's good practice to indicate the source and destination of the transaction. So in the bank account, we've written that the amount has come from the capital account, and in the capital account, that the amount has been recorded in the bank account. As a reminder, we can prepare a statement of financial position at any point in time. The accounts in the ledger are totalled, balanced, and the totals are recorded in the relevant section of the report. The amounts are equal and opposite. So the balance between assets and liabilities has been maintained. It's good to use ledger accounts when learning double entry, as they provide a good visual, and for some they're easier to work with. Sometimes you'll see double entry listed rather than entered into ledger accounts. The first column is showing the account in which the entry will be made, then whether it will be entered in that account as a debit or credit. Whilst you're learning, you can choose which method works best for you, but eventually you'll need to be able to work with both methods. Let's remind ourselves that equal and opposite transactions can be double entered in any combination of accounts. Here we have a bank account which shows the business holds £25,000 in the bank. If the business were to purchase computer equipment costing £2,500, we reduce the bank balance with a credit entry, and we record that the business now owns computer equipment. We've exchanged the asset of cash for a physical asset. Get ready to pause the video to give yourself time to read and answer the question. The amount received is paid into the bank, increasing the asset of cash, so a debit entry is made in the bank account. Customer debt is an asset. The credit entry in the customer's debt account reduces the amount they owe. The revised bank balance is £25,250. The revised customer debt balance is £3,250. Here we have two liability accounts. The credit card account is showing that the business owes £8,900 on its credit card. The loan account is showing that it owes the loan provider £15,000. Crediting these accounts will increase the business's liability, the amount owed. Debit entries will reduce the debt. Get ready to pause the video to give yourself time to read and answer the question. The credit card company has given the business £300 to pay the loan, so the credit card debt increases by £300, a credit entry. The loan provider receives £300, reducing the business's liability, a debit entry. The credit card debt is now £9,200. The lender is now owed £14,700. Double entry is much easier to work out when there are account balances in the accounts already, and in a real set of accounts you'll be able to see them. When studying, they don't make it that easy for you. It's best to take a methodical approach when processing transactions. The first step is to consider whether you're using an asset or liability account. Then, establish which side you'd expect to see the opening balance on. An asset account is a debit record, so you'd expect to see the opening balance on the debit side. A liability account is a credit record, so you'd expect to see the opening balance on the credit side. Then establish whether you need to increase or reduce the account balance. In an asset account, debits will increase the account balance, the value of that asset. A credit entry has the opposite effect and reduces it. In a liability account, further credit entries will increase the account balance, the liability, and debit entries will reduce it. And the final step is to identify the dual aspect. Get ready to pause the video to read and answer the question. When there's no bank balance in the account, I recommend assuming there's money in the bank so you can apply the rules of an asset account. The cash account is also an asset account, so in both of these accounts you'd expect to find the opening balance on the debit side of the accounts. Making a debit entry increases the bank or cash balance, and a credit entry decreases it. Withdrawing cash from the bank reduces the bank balance, so we make a credit entry. Putting cash into the safe increases the amount of cash held on the premises, so we debit the cash account. Here we've moved the asset of cash from the bank account to the cash account. I compare learning double entry to learning a new language. You're not going to master it immediately, but you will in time. The only way to become proficient is to study in bite-sized chunks, practice and reflect on what you've learned, and rest in between sessions to give yourself time to process and store new skills. So please take the time to do this before you move on to the next lesson. I hope you've enjoyed learning double entry using asset and liability accounts. In the next lesson, we will be learning about how to record income in the double entry bookkeeping system.